Hello and welcome to today's session at Best Choice Training. This is for the Business Administrations at Level 3. I'm Leanne, I'm your assessor for today. My contact details will be provided at the end of this course on the online presentation for you. So previously we have discussed stakeholders, who they are and how you work with them within your apprenticeship. Today we are going to be looking at relevant legislations and policies. In today's session, you will be able to understand the relevant legislations within the workplace, also demonstrate knowledge of legislations tailored to your workplace sector, and to be able to prepare to present a PowerPoint presentation on legislations of your workplace for the next session. Please upload any assignments onto OneFile ready for your next session. So these will be the PowerPoint slides. There will be a knowledge quiz at the end of this session for you to complete. And please complete the survey at the end of this session to help us continually improve our courses. So what is a legislation? A legislation is the act of making laws. These laws are embedded into the UK employment.
Making laws. One of Parliament's main jobs is to examine and approve new laws. The lawmaking process usually begins with a bill, which is proposed for either a new law or a change to an existing law. Bills can be introduced by the government or by individual MPs or members of the House of Lords. The stages of examining bills are the same in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but the rules and the way each house works during these stages are different. Each house can make changes to the contents of a bill, but any changes that are made must be agreed to by both houses before it can become law. In certain cases, a bill may be passed without the approval of the Lords, if the Commons passes the same bill in 2 successive years, or if the bill is about taxes or public expenditure. An Act of Parliament is known as primary legislation. Acts often establish the main principles of a new law while allowing government ministers to set out the finer detail in secondary or delegated legislation. Find out more about lawmaking at www.parliament.uk/makinglaws.
All resources will be referenced at the end of this slideshow. But legislation is embedded within British values, so when you live and work within the UK, you are adhering to legislations and also adhering to British values. The first legislation we are going to look at today is Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. As you can see here, you can probably recognise the poster dotted around your workplaces, and the Health and Safety at Work Act regulates workplace health and safety and welfare. It aims to protect people from risk of injury and ill health by ensuring employees' health, safety and welfare at work. It also protects non-employees against the health and safety risks arising from work activities. Non-employees are those visitors that come to your workplace. If you work in a medical centre, for example, non-employees would be patients, family members, and potentially other NHS workers that visit the clinic. This legislation also states that employees themselves have a duty to take responsibility of care for their own health and safety and protect other workers and other non-employees. For example, as an employee within your workplace, it is your responsibility to identify any hazards in the workplace. A hazard may be a chair that hasn't been placed properly in its correct position or tucked away. It may be a loose wire or a trip or fall hazard within your working environment. It is also to be noted of clear lighting. Do you have sufficient lighting to complete your daily tasks? And also, do you know where the correct fire exits are? Are you aware of the fire exit procedures? What would happen if there were to be a fire? Do you understand the procedures that your workplace takes? And Health and Safety at Work Act also covers first aid. So are you aware of where the first aid box is? Are you qualified or trained to provide first aid treatment to any casualties, for example? These are all questions worth asking your employer regarding health and safety. The next legislation is the Personal Protective Equipment Regulations, so PPE 2018. This legislation needs to be able to provide suitable provision. Where it has been assessed that PPE is required, the provision of PPE must be suitable and appropriate to the work task and its associated risk. Also, the equipment must fit the user properly and be of proportionate size and weight for them to use. For example, face shields. Do they fit you correctly? Does it actually cover your face and your nose? And also, where more than one item of equipment it needs to be worn for any given task, the items must still be effective when worn together. So for example, the wearing of one item, take protective eyewear, must not cause another item to be ill-fitting and therefore ineffective, for example a respirator, and vice versa. This legislation also means that the maintenance and storage of PPE must be properly looked after, maintained and stored. Any reusable items must be properly cleaned and kept in a good condition. And also, if items have disposable parts, for example respirator filters, replacement parts must be compatible with the original piece of equipment. Considerations such as having replacement PPE available in the event of damage or malfunction, and appointing someone to oversee how or when the items are maintained are important too. It's the duty of the employer to ensure that employees have the correct training on the use of personal protective equipment. What level of responsibility has the employee got towards the maintenance of PPE equipment must also be considered within this training. And also that employees are properly informed about the risks of PPE equipment that they are being protected from. It is also the responsibility of the employer to ensure that any PPE provided is being used correctly. Furthermore, the duty of the employee is to use the equipment in accordance with instructions and training. That is your employee's responsibility with personal protective equipment. It should be noted that wherever personal protective equipment has been identified as being required as part of the control measure provision, then this must be provided at no cost to the employee. This includes the replacement of such equipment. Employees also have a responsibility to report any damage, defects, or loss of equipment that they are aware of. This is under the legislation Personal Protective Equipment Regulation. The next legislation we are going to look at is the Equality and Diversity Act 2010. The Equality Act 2010 legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in the wider society. It has actually replaced previous anti-discrimination laws with one single act, making the law easier to understand and also strengthening protection in some situations. It sets out the different ways in which it is unlawful to treat someone. It is against the law to discriminate anyone because of age, gender reassignment, being married or in a civil partnership, being pregnant or on maternity leave, whether a person has a disability, whether a person has a different race, including colour, nationality, ethnicity or national origin, religions or beliefs, what their sex is, sexual orientation. All of these are called protected characteristics. You are protected from discrimination within your workplace, within education, as a consumer, also when used in public services and when buying or renting properties. You are protected under these protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. You are also protected from discrimination if you are associated with someone who has a protected characteristic, for example, a family member or a friend, or if you have complained about discrimination or supported somebody else's claim. You are protected under the Equality Act 2010. The next legislation is regarding infection control. Infection control management within a healthcare environment or other business sectors needs to be a part of the employer's overall aim of ensuring that they provide a safe working environment for personnel and other contractors affected by the work undertaken. As part of Section 2 of the Health and Safety Work Act 1974 requires the employer to ensure that health and safety and welfare of employees at work is managed. This includes reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences 2013. This is where a member of staff have been off sick for 7 consecutive days or more, or there is an infectious disease within the workplace. For example, COVID-19, Public Health England will step in. Other acts within infection control are the Public Health Control of Diseases Act 1984 and 1998, the Management of Health and Safety at Work, control of substances hazardous to health. So if you do have bleach, for example, cleaning equipment, printer toners, anything like that, that will be under this legislation. Also, the Food Safety and Hygiene Regulations 2013 and Food Safety Act 1990 protects employees, especially if they are handling food within restaurants, for example, or to be able to train members of staff to be able to use the fridge correctly. And also the Health Protection Regulation 2010 comes under infection control. Especially with COVID-19, we are seeing a major rise with infection control training. This includes wiping down surfaces effectively, making sure you are provided with the correct anti-infection wipes and disinfectants, and also to understand the correct hand washing procedures. The next act we are going to be looking at is GDPR. This is the Data Protection Act. With this act, everyone is responsible for using personal data has to follow strict rules called data protection principles. They must make sure that the information that they are using is used fairly, lawfully and transparently. It is also the information is used for specified explicit purposes and used in a way that is adequate, relevant and limited to only what is necessary. This information also needs to be accurate and when necessary kept up to date and is not kept for longer than necessary. Data protection also means that data needs to be handled in a way that ensures appropriate security, including the protection against unlawful or unauthorised processing, access or loss, destruction or damage of the data. So under the Data Protection Act 2018, you have the right to find what information and other organisations store about you. These include the right to be informed about how your data is being used, have access to your personal data, have incorrect data be updated, and also to have data erased, stop the use or restrict the processing of your data, data portability, allowing you to get and reuse your data for different services, and also object to how your data is processed in uncertain circumstances. And you also have rights when an organisation is using your data for automated decision-making processes. This means without human involvement, and for profiling, for example, to predict your behaviours or interests. Lots of data that we handle at the moment is currently online. So what we need to do to be in regulation with the Data Protection Act is have password secured folders and making sure, especially for example working in medical centres, that you do not give out patients' medical details or personal data over the phone. The next Act we are going to look at is the Computer Display Screen Equipment Regulations that first came into place in 1992 and was updated in 2002. As an employer, you must protect your workers from the health risks of working with display screen equipment, such as computers, laptops, tablets and smartphones. This regulation applies to workers who use display screens on a daily basis for more than 1 hour at a time. We describe these workers as DSE workers. And this regulation does not apply to workers who use DSE infrequently or only use it for a short time. So to be able to protect workers' health within law, employers must do a DSE workstation assessment. This will reduce risks, including making sure workers take regular breaks from their screens, that they can go and do something different, for example. The employer should provide an eye test if a worker asks for one, and also provide training and information for workers. Incorrect use of DSE or poorly designed workstations or environments can lead to pain, neck pain, also pain in the shoulders, the backs, the arms, wrists and hands, as well as all over fatigue and eye strain. The law applies if users are, for example, at a fixed workstation, if they are mobile workers, home workers and also hot deskers. So these are workers who carry out basic risk assessment if they change desks regularly. We are moving on to the National Minimum Wage Act of 2010. The government sets out a minimum amount you must get paid on average for the hours you work. This is called the National Minimum Wage, or the living wage if you're over 25 or over. As you can see, there has been a slight increase in the minimum wage, and there will be links provided at the end of this course for you to explore this further. We are now going to move on to more sector-specific legislations. And our first example is estate agencies. If you work in an estate agency, there are three main governing bodies. These are the Association of Residential Letting Agents, Estate Agents Act, Property Misdisposition Act 1991, and Unfair Terms in Consumer Contract Regulations, and the Housing Act 2004. These legislations are all governed under the three main governing bodies, as you can see on screen. If you do work within this sector, within a state agency, then your homework is to research the legislations related to this sector. How do they relate to your role? This can also include the legislations we have previously spoke about, Data Protection, Infection Control, Health and Safety at Work Act, and you need to create a PowerPoint presentation and to go into detail regarding these legislations. So there are some on screen for you, but your homework is to research legislations that are specifically for estate agencies. Next, we are going to look at medical practices. So currently there are over 50 different legislations that medical practices must follow. All of these are regulated by the CQC. As you can see, we've already touched on a couple of them: Health and Safety at Work Act. You've also got the Care Act 2014, the Abortion Act 1967, and the Human Tissue Act 2004. There are many more. So if you work in a medical centre, then your homework will be to research the legislations that the medical centre complies to and how they relate to your role. Also, you are needed to create this into a PowerPoint presentation to be presented within the next online session. Next, we are going to be looking at the sector for solicitors. The Legal Service Board is responsible for overseeing the regulation of all lawyers in England and Wales. There are then 8 separate regulators directly relating to the different types of lawyers on a day-to-day basis. The different types of lawyers and their approved regulators are as follows. So solicitors, for example, are regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and they also regulate other types of individuals and firms. Barristers are regulated by the Bar Standards Board and the independent regulatory arm of the Bar Council. Legal executives are regulated by CIL EX regulation, the independent regulatory arm of the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives, and licensed conveyors, regulated by the Council for Licensed Conveyors. Also, the patent and trademark attorneys are regulated by the Intellectual Property Regulation Board and the independent regulatory arm of the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys and the Institute of Trademark Attorneys. Cost lawyers are regulated by the Cost Lawyer Standards Board, the independent regulatory arm of the Association of Cost Lawyers, and notaries are regulated by the Master of the Faculties. Again, if you are working within this sector, then your homework will be to research the legislations that solicitors comply to and how they relate to your role. You also need to create this into a PowerPoint presentation to be presented within the next online session. The next sector we're going to be looking at is translators. Translators need to be a member of the National Register of Public Services Interpreters. As you can see here, I've provided a couple of links, but what you need to do as homework as translator sector is research what legislations translators need to comply to, and again, present this within a PowerPoint presentation in the next session. Accountants. If you work within the accountancy sector, you are regulated by the Financial Reporting Council. They promote transparency and integrity within their businesses, and it also regulates the auditors, accountants and actuaries and sets the UK Corporate Government and Stewardship Code. You may also find the Data Protection Act, Health and Safety at Work Act, and as you can see I've provided a link there. More will follow in these slides, and your homework is to research if you are in the accountancy sector all the legislations that comply to accountants, and also pop that into a PowerPoint presentation. Due to the pandemic, there are now COVID-19 legislations, and two key items of the primary legislations contain emergency powers relating to coronavirus and the health protection in England. These are the Coronavirus Act 2020, and then Public Health Control of Disease Act 1984. And then also, as we all know, there are 3 tiers which are set out local restrictions in England under the following regulations. These tiers are under the regulation for the Health Protection Regulation 2020. And these regulations set out the 3 tiers which comply to different severity levels of the restrictions for each tier, which are constantly being reviewed. You are also able to add the COVID-19 legislations within your presentation, as this will probably overlap with infection control. As I keep repeating, your homework is to research, create and reference a PowerPoint presentation relating to your workplace sector. Please reference your work. You'll find at the end of these slides I have referenced a lot of material, and there will be hyperlinked links for you on the next slides of the online course. Once you've created your PowerPoint presentation, please upload your slides onto the OneFile as evidence, and also be prepared to present your findings in a group setting for your next session. In the next session, you will be training others on legislations within your workplace. This is why you need to bring your PowerPoint presentation and your notes. I'm more than happy for you to have notes as you present. And then the next session we will be looking at ICT within the business environment. As I mentioned, here are the references. I will also hyperlink them for you onto the virtual learning environment. Any questions that you may have, please email myself as your assessor. Contact details will be left for you. And thank you again for attending the relevant legislations and policies for Business Administration Level 3. I hope you found this informative, and I look forward to seeing your presentations regarding legislations within your work sector. Thank you, and I will see you in the next session.